The grand hall glittered with golden chandeliers, their light spilling across polished marble floors, where the most powerful and wealthy figures of the city gathered, in gowns and tailored suits, sipping wine as they exchanged polite laughter and empty compliments, each one trying to outshine the other. The night was designed to be perfect, a celebration of power, prestige, and promises of bigger deals. But then the doors opened, and a woman stepped inside, her entrance quiet yet commanding in a way that words could not explain. She wore no heavy jewels, no loud colors, only an elegant dress that spoke of refinement and confidence, and yet there was something in the way she carried herself that made a few heads turn despite their attempts to ignore her presence. She was not part of their social circle, at least not in the way they measured worth, and whispers began to move like ripples in water, some curious, others dismissive, as if her very arrival disturbed the careful image of the evening. Still, she walked forward calmly, her step steady, her face calm, not once lowering her gaze, even when she caught the eyes of those who studied her with judgment. She looked as though she belonged to another kind of world, one built not on shallow approval, but on quiet victories only she truly understood. The orchestra played on, crystal glasses clinked, and the hall sparkled with false smiles, yet for a moment, it seemed the rhythm of the night had shifted, though no one could quite place why. People continued to watch her, some with curiosity, others with a faint sense of unease, as though her very presence hinted at something that might unfold before the evening ended, something no one had planned for. The hosts, too caught up in their circle of admirers, barely noticed her arrival, but the air around her carried an energy that refused to be dismissed, and though she took no effort to demand attention, it followed her like a shadow. There was a story written in her calm silence, a strength hidden behind her graceful composure, and though no one yet knew it, the gala that began as a celebration of wealth would soon be remembered for something far more powerful. As she walked further into the hall, her presence did not go unnoticed, but not for the reasons she deserved. The chandeliers sparkled above, and glasses clinked softly in the hands of wealthy guests. Yet in one corner of the room, members of the host family leaned closer to each other, exchanging glances filled with arrogance. Their lips curled into faint smirks as they whispered in low tones, their words sharp enough to cut, even without being heard clearly. One raised an eyebrow, as if questioning how she had found her way into such a gathering, while another let out a muffled laugh, covering it with a sip of champagne. Their eyes followed her like shadows, not with curiosity, but with quiet mockery, as though her presence disturbed the picture of perfection they believed they owned. She could sense it not from their voices, but from the air itself, which seemed to grow heavier around her. She knew these were not whispers of admiration, but of doubt, of judgment, of dismissal. Still, she kept her head high, each step measured, her calm demeanor unshaken, even as the whispers trailed her like faint echoes. For every smile she offered, there was a mocking glance mirrored in return, as if they could not imagine she belonged to their world of polished suits, sparkling gowns, and carefully staged elegance. Yet, what they did not know was that beneath her quiet entrance lay a strength far greater than their shallow wealth. She did not need to defend herself with words, not yet, because the truth had a way of speaking louder than gossip. The more they whispered, the more the stage was being set not for her downfall, as they hoped, but for their own reckoning. Every laugh they shared at her expense only deepened the suspense in the air, drawing invisible lines that would soon turn back on them. And though she gave no sign of hearing their comments, her silence was not weakness. It was patience, the kind that waits for the perfect moment to reveal itself. Little did they know, the woman they dismissed so carelessly was the very reason this gala existed, and their whispers, which they thought harmless, were already shaping a story that none of them would ever forget. She could feel their eyes following her like cold winds brushing against her skin. Yet she did not allow even the smallest flicker of discomfort to appear on her face. Their smirks, their sideways glances, the whispered tones meant to cut her down, all of it only echoed in the background like faint, meaningless noise. She stood tall, her posture a quiet statement that needed no words, her presence commanding more than any outburst ever could. As she moved through the hall, every step seemed deliberate, carrying with it a grace that contrasted the pettiness around her. The chandeliers above cast a golden glow on her, making her look as though she belonged not just in the room, but at its very center. She knew her worth was not defined by the approval of those who tried to belittle her. Years of struggle, discipline, and triumph had shaped her into someone far stronger than the judgments whispered behind fragile smiles. Her calm face did not show the storm of memories she carried, moments of rejection, moments where others had doubted her, but she had risen above them all. Tonight was no different. She had nothing to prove to anyone in that hall, yet her silent strength itself became proof that dignity could silence mockery, proof that self-respect could outweigh arrogance. Those who tried to measure her with shallow eyes soon found themselves uneasy. For the more she ignored their mockery, the more her presence unsettled them. Her stillness was not weakness, it was power. It was the kind of strength that did not bend, did not react, did not need to defend itself because it already stood victorious. Even as the whispers continued, she walked with quiet confidence, holding her head high, her silence louder than their voices. And though none of them realized it yet, that calm dignity would soon become the very force that turned the evening upside down. The same people who now doubted her presence would, in time, have no choice but to face the weight of their mistake. Because she was not just another guest in their world, she was the storm that arrived disguised in silence. The soft music in the hall came to a pause as the host of the evening, dressed in his finest suit, stepped toward the center of the stage with a confident smile that carried both authority and charm. His voice echoed through the grand hall as he addressed the glittering crowd, announcing that tonight was not just a night of celebration, but a night that could decide the future of their empire. He revealed that an important investor had joined the gala, a person whose choices could open doors to unimaginable wealth and opportunities. Instantly, the air grew heavy with excitement, and conversations dropped to whispers as eyes darted across the room, trying to guess who it could be. The wealthy guests straightened their postures, their faces glowing with anticipation, while some exchanged hopeful looks, already imagining themselves in the favor of this mysterious figure. The host's words lingered in the air like a spark waiting to ignite, building a tension that spread quickly among the crowd. Every sound, every movement, suddenly felt magnified, the clink of glasses, the rustle of dresses, the faint tapping of shoes on polished marble floors. The family hosting the gala smiled broadly, their pride barely concealed, believing they alone held the key to this investor's approval. Yet, beneath their smiles, a flicker of unease flashed in their eyes, as if they feared the spotlight might not shine the way they expected. The guests leaned forward eagerly, waiting for the revelation, their hearts pounding in rhythm with the suspense that filled the golden hall. In that moment, the grand chandelier above seemed to glow brighter, the lights bouncing across crystal glasses like tiny stars, while time itself felt as if it had slowed, holding its breath. The stage was set, the atmosphere thick with expectation, and though no name had yet been spoken, everyone knew that the next few moments would shape not only the night, but the future of every person connected to this grand empire. The hall, which only moments before had been filled with laughter, music, and the clinking of glasses, suddenly grew quiet as the host announced her name, each syllable echoing in the silence like a strike of a drum. Faces turned in unison, and eyes widened as realization spread across the room. The woman they had whispered about, the one they had dismissed as unworthy of their company, was the very investor whose approval could secure or shatter their future. A heavy stillness fell, almost suffocating, as embarrassment, disbelief, and even fear washed over the elegant faces of the family who had mocked her. Guests exchanged uneasy glances, some covering their mouths in surprise, while others simply stared, unable to hide their shock. The host himself faltered for a brief moment, his polished confidence slipping as he realized the weight of what had just been revealed. And there she stood, calm and composed, her presence commanding more respect in that silence than all their wealth and glittering gowns combined. The whispers that had once followed her now died completely, replaced by the unspoken question hanging in the air. How would she respond? Would she remember the smirks, the mocking words, the careless dismissal? The family who had treated her as an outsider now found themselves exposed under the sharp light of truth, their pride trembling like fragile glass. The woman did not move quickly or rush to claim attention. Her strength was in her stillness, her quiet grace that seemed louder than any applause. She lifted her chin, her gaze steady, her poise unbroken, and the room felt the weight of her presence. It was no longer the music or the glittering chandeliers that defined the gala. It was her. Every heart waited, every mind wondered what she would say or do next. Suspense hung so thick it seemed to press against the walls. In that moment, the story of the night shifted forever, because the woman they had tried to diminish was the very one who held their fate in her hands, and all they could do was wait in silence for her next move. The silence in the hall broke awkwardly as the host family, who only minutes earlier had been exchanging smirks and whispers at her expense, hurried forward with forced smiles stretched across their faces. Their sudden warmth was too polished, too rehearsed, dripping with a sweetness that fooled no one. The patriarch extended his hand, his voice filled with exaggerated charm, but the stiffness in his eyes betrayed the unease beneath his mask. His wife followed, showering her with compliments that sounded hollow, her words tumbling out too quickly, as though hoping to erase the memory of her earlier mocking glance. Even the younger members of the family joined in, bowing slightly, offering polite greetings, their faces flushed with embarrassment as the guests watched in tense silence. It was a desperate performance, an attempt to rewrite the script of the evening and present themselves as gracious hosts. But the cracks in their act showed clearly. The woman, however, did not rush to fill the silence or ease their discomfort. She let their words hang in the air, calm and collected, her eyes observing them with quiet strength. The contrast between her dignified stillness and their nervous overacting only deepened the unease in the room. Guests shifted in their seats, some whispering to one another, recognizing the insincerity that clung to every gesture. The family's charm, once their greatest weapon in society, now seemed clumsy and transparent under the sharp truth of the moment. They wanted to erase the memory of their arrogance, but the weight of what they had revealed about themselves was already etched into the evening. The woman, still holding her poise, gave a small nod, not with malice or arrogance, but with a grace that unsettled them further. Her silence spoke louder than any words, making it clear she remembered everything, and that she did not need to raise her voice to show her power. The room hung in suspense, watching the powerful shift of control once in the family's hands, now resting completely with her. And while they tried to cover their unease with smiles and polite chatter, everyone could see that beneath the glitter and glamour, the balance of power had changed forever, and nothing they could say would undo what had already been revealed. The atmosphere in the hall grew heavier when the host, still forcing his polished smile, raised his glass and announced that the honored guest, the woman everyone had underestimated, would take the stage to share a few words. Applause followed, polite but charged with nervous energy, as she rose from her chair with calm grace. All eyes turned to her, some expecting a safe, routine speech filled with figures, plans, and business promises, while others leaned forward, sensing something deeper behind the calm expression she wore. The host family clapped a little louder than the rest, as though trying to drown out the memory of their earlier whispers. Their smiles stretched so wide they looked almost painful. She walked toward the stage with steady steps, her posture tall and commanding without effort, her silence carrying a weight stronger than any applause. The room waited, breaths held, the chandeliers casting golden light over her as she reached the podium. She rested her hands gently on the edge, her eyes scanning the crowd, not rushing to speak, letting the silence build into a tension that made every heartbeat echo louder. Guests expected her to dive into numbers or safe acknowledgments, but there was something in the way she stood, something unshaken and purposeful, that made them realize this moment would not be ordinary. Her steady gaze passed over the host family, who shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their smiles beginning to tremble at the edges. The longer she paused, the stronger the suspense grew, like the calm before a storm no one could predict. People leaned closer, their earlier chatter forgotten, waiting to see whether she would follow the expected script or break it entirely. Even the staff at the edges of the hall slowed their movements, caught in the gravity of the moment. She finally took a quiet breath, her voice steady yet carrying an undeniable power. And though her words had not yet begun to reveal their full meaning, the listeners already knew this would not be a simple business speech. There was something in her tone, in the strength of her presence, that promised truth, consequence, and perhaps even a reckoning, and no one in the room could look away. She stood at the podium, the lights above catching the calm strength in her face, and for a moment she said nothing. The silence was not empty, was alive, pressing into the corners of the room until even the sound of breathing felt too loud. Every eye clung to her, waiting, searching for the first word that might break the unbearable tension. Her pause was not hesitation. It was deliberate, a quiet command that forced the restless energy of the crowd into stillness. The wealthy guests who had moments earlier been whispering and sipping their drinks now sat frozen, their glasses untouched, their attention drawn to her as though she held the air itself. The host family tried to keep smiling, but their lips wavered, their nerves exposed beneath the weight of her calm. Even the musicians in the far corner lowered their instruments, sensing that no sound could compete with the unspoken message filling the hall. The pause stretched, and with each second, anticipation deepened. Some wondered if she was collecting her thoughts, while others began to realize she was letting them reflect on their own unease. Her stillness spoke of confidence, of a quiet power that needed no rush to prove itself. The silence became heavier than words, forcing people to confront their own discomfort, reminding them of what had been said and done earlier in careless whispers and mocking glances. The chandeliers glimmered above, their light bouncing off the golden walls. But no one admired the beauty of the room anymore. Their focus belonged entirely to her. Guests shifted slightly in their chairs, waiting for her voice to finally cut through the air, knowing that when it did, it would carry more weight than anything else said that night. She looked across the room slowly, meeting the eyes of strangers and acquaintances alike, each glance carrying the quiet reminder that she had seen and heard more than they realized. The pause was a test, and they all knew it. When she finally drew in a calm, steady breath, the silence tightened, as though the entire hall leaned forward together, desperate to hear the first word of a speech that already felt like it could change everything. Her voice rose at last, calm yet steady, carrying across the grand hall, with a strength that silenced even the faintest whispers. She began not with figures, profits, or business talk, but with something that struck deeper. She told the room that wealth could buy chandeliers, fine gowns, and lavish gatherings, but it could never buy true respect. Respect, she explained, is shown in the way people treat others when they believe no one important is watching. Her words cut gently, yet sharply, and the air grew heavier as many remembered their own mocking glances and hushed laughter from earlier. She did not raise her voice, yet every sentence seemed to echo louder than music, pressing into their thoughts. She reminded them that character is revealed in small moments, how a stranger is welcomed, how a guest is treated, how kindness or cruelty shows itself without warning. The mocking she had endured when she first walked in had been subtle to some, but to her it had been clear, and tonight she chose not to ignore it. She explained that such behavior did not humiliate her, because her worth was not tied to their approval, but it did expose them. A few guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while others lowered their eyes, as if caught in a mirror that showed them truth they did not want to see. The host family forced stiff smiles, but the cracks in their confidence grew more visible as her words poured into the hall. She spoke not with anger, but with a calm authority that made it impossible to dismiss her. Her message was simple. Money can shape a business deal, but dignity shapes a legacy. Without respect, wealth was empty, and without character, power was fragile. Her words flowed like a lesson they had not expected, a quiet storm unraveling their arrogance. Every person in the room felt the weight of her truth, and though she never once raised her tone, her speech struck harder than any accusation could. By the time she paused again, the guests no longer saw her as an outsider. They saw her as someone holding up a mirror to their souls, leaving them to wonder how much of themselves they truly wanted the world to see. The moment her words settled into the air, the entire room seemed to change. The once lively chatter was gone, replaced by a silence so heavy it almost echoed. Guests shifted in their chairs, their proud faces softening as the weight of shame pressed down on them. A few tried to keep smiling, but their eyes betrayed the discomfort they felt. Others stared at the floor, suddenly unwilling to meet anyone's gaze, as if lowering their heads could erase the fact that they had been part of what had happened. Those who had laughed earlier now wished their laughter had never left their lips. Even those who had remained quiet began to realize their silence had made them complicit. It was not only her words that made them uneasy, but the knowledge that every single person in the hall had witnessed the truth unfold together. There was no hiding behind excuses, no pretending it had not happened. The mocking, the whispers, the arrogance, all of it had been exposed under the brightest light of all, her calm dignity. The host family stood frozen, their forced politeness now trembling at the edges, aware that their reputation was unraveling right in front of their guests. They had expected the night to be one of celebration and prestige, but instead, it was turning into a quiet trial of their own character. The guests, too, felt torn between the allure of wealth and the sting of morality, realizing that the very values they had pretended to honor had been tested in. Many had failed. The air grew colder as the silence stretched, broken only by the faint clink of a glass someone nervously set down. No one dared to speak, fearing that even the smallest word might draw attention to their guilt. Eyes darted toward her, some filled with respect, others with regret, but all with recognition that they had underestimated her. She stood there, unshaken, while the room around her seemed to shrink beneath the weight of her truth. The night that was supposed to shine with glitter and luxury had turned into a lesson that none of them could ignore, a lesson they would carry long after the lights dimmed. The silence in the grand hall deepened as she straightened her shoulders and let her calm gaze sweep across the crowd, her presence commanding attention without force. Then, with a steady voice that carried to every corner of the room, she made her announcement. She explained that she had come with the intention of building a partnership, of investing not only in numbers but in people, in values, in trust. But what she had witnessed that evening had revealed more than financial reports ever could. With grace, she declared that she could not invest her time, her resources, or her reputation in a family or a business that could not uphold the simplest principle of all respect for another human being. The words landed like stones thrown into a still pond, sending ripples through the room. A few guests gasped softly, while others exchanged uneasy glances, realizing the meaning was final. The host family froze, their carefully practiced smiles faltering as their empire, their image, and their pride all seemed to crumble in the space of a few sentences. The crowd shifted nervously, some admiring her boldness, others fearing what this revelation meant for them, as they had been part of the night's silent cruelty. She did not raise her voice, nor did she show anger. Yet her words carried the weight of authority, stronger than any shout could deliver. She spoke of dignity as the foundation of every true success, reminding them that wealth without humanity was nothing more than emptiness dressed in gold. The longer she spoke, the more the guests felt their own hearts pulled into reflection. Some nodded slowly, their earlier arrogance melting into quiet respect. Others struggled to mask their embarrassment, realizing the very woman they had dismissed now held not only power, but also integrity that they could never buy. By the time she ended her announcement, the room was completely still. The glitter of the chandeliers seemed dimmer, the music in the background forgotten, and all that remained was her unshakable truth. She had drawn a line that no one could cross, leaving the hosts and their guests to face the consequences of their choices. The hall, once filled with chatter and laughter, now stood in heavy silence, as if the very air had been drained of sound. The host family, who had carried themselves with so much confidence only moments before, now looked frozen in disbelief. Their smiles had vanished, their carefully crafted image shattered in front of the very people they had sought to impress. For weeks, they had spoken about the billion-dollar deal as if it were already secured, boasting of future projects, expansion, and glory. Guests had toasted them in advance, eager to stay close to what seemed like guaranteed success. But now, with a few calm and measured words, that shining future had collapsed like a fragile glass dropped from great height. The silence of the family told a story louder than words ever could, their faces pale, their eyes darting in desperation, their pride pierced by the truth they had never expected to hear so publicly. Around the room, guests shifted uneasily, some pitying the family, others quietly savoring the lesson unfolding before them. Whispers began to stir, not of admiration for the hosts, but of respect for the woman who had stood against their arrogance with dignity. The sound of clinking glasses and laughter was gone, replaced by the weight of realization that everyone present had just witnessed a turning point, a moment that would be remembered far longer than the glitter of the gala. The host family tried to regain composure, forcing stiff smiles, but the effort was transparent, their grandeur now seen as hollow. Their wealth could not shield them, their titles could not protect them, and the billion-dollar deal they thought was their crown jewel had slipped away before their eyes. What they had mocked so carelessly had returned with the sharpest consequence. As the woman stood silently, her presence unshaken, the hall seemed to bow to her strength, and the hosts, for all their riches, stood smaller than ever before. It was not just their deal that had been lost, but their reputation, their pride, and their power, all undone in one unforgettable night. The hall was wrapped in silence, the kind that made every second feel stretched, as if the walls themselves held their breath. Then, from somewhere near the back, came the sound of a single pair of hands clapping. It was slow, deliberate, and carried through the heavy stillness like a spark in the dark. Heads turned, eyes shifted, and for a moment, no one else moved, unsure if they should follow. Then another person joined, their applause stronger, and soon the rhythm spread like ripples in water. People who had moments ago shared in the mocking now felt their faces burn with shame as they clapped, not for the wealth or the promise of a deal, but for the strength of the woman standing before them. Her calm presence, her refusal to bend, had revealed something rare that money could never buy: dignity. The clapping grew louder, rolling across the room until even those who hesitated could no longer remain still, their hands coming together, not out of habit, but from a genuine sense of respect. The host family stood frozen, their forced smiles fading, their power slipping through their fingers, while the guest they had dismissed became the center of honor. In that moment, the meaning of the evening changed. The gala was no longer about contracts or wealth. It had transformed into a lesson that all could feel deep within. Each clap carried a message, one that said courage mattered more than money, and respect mattered more than influence. She did not smile or bow, but simply stood tall, her steady gaze sweeping across the crowd. reminding them silently that her decision was final. The applause continued, steady and strong, until it filled the room like a tide of recognition, and every person present knew they were witnessing something unforgettable, a moment where truth had defeated arrogance. She stepped down from the stage slowly, her heels clicking against the polished floor, each step carrying a weight that was not of defeat but of strength and certainty. The applause still echoed behind her, yet she did not linger in it, for she had not come seeking validation but to stand for what was right. Her head was held high, her face calm, her movements measured with quiet pride, as if the noise of the world could not shake her steady spirit. The host family watched helplessly, their smiles now gone, their future slipping through their grasp, while she moved past them without a glance, making it clear that their approval meant nothing. The crowd parted as she walked, and eyes followed her, some filled with admiration, others with regret, but none could deny the power she carried in her silence. It was not just about money or business anymore. She had reminded them all that values were not for sale, and that dignity could never be traded for profit. There was no arrogance in her step, only grace, the kind that leaves a lasting impression long after the moment is gone. Even those who had mocked her earlier now felt a sting of guilt as they realized the lesson she had given them would stay in their memories far longer than any deal ever could. The hall seemed different now, the air heavier with awareness, as if everyone present had been forced to confront a truth they had long ignored. She reached the exit, her pace steady, her presence unshaken, and as the doors opened before her, the sound of clapping still rolled behind like a distant wave. She did not look back, for she had no need to. She had said what needed to be said, shown what needed to be shown, and by walking away with such composure, she left behind not just a broken deal, but a powerful reminder. Wealth can build empires, but respect builds legacies. Her departure was not a loss, but a triumph, and as she vanished into the night, the silence she left in her wake was louder than any speech, echoing with the message that dignity has no price. The night of the gala did not end within the walls of that glittering hall, for the story that unfolded there began to travel far and wide, carried first in whispers among the guests, and then spreading like fire through the city and beyond. People spoke of the woman who had been mocked, underestimated, and yet rose above it with unshakable dignity, turning what was meant to humiliate her into a moment of strength that humbled an entire family. Newspapers caught the tale quickly, headlines framing her as the investor who walked away from $1 billion deal to protect something far greater than profit her values. Social media filled with clips of her speech and her calm walk from the stage, with strangers writing about how her courage had given them hope and reminding them that respect was worth more than wealth. In offices, in classrooms, even in homes where people gathered around dinner tables, the story was retold, not as business news, but as a lesson in character. Many, who had never met her, felt as if they had, for her stand spoke a language every human could understand, the need to be seen with dignity and treated with respect. The host family, once celebrated for their influence, now found themselves under sharp criticism, their arrogance exposed, their downfall made public by their own actions. Yet, the woman did not celebrate their loss. Her victory was not in their failure but in showing the world that true power does not come from money, but from integrity. She lived quietly in the days that followed, not chasing attention, but the world kept her story alive because it resonated with a truth people often forget in their rush for success. Generations would remember her not as a wealthy investor, but as a symbol of strength, a reminder that standing for what is right, even when it costs everything, is never truly a loss. The gala became a chapter in history, but her name became a story repeated in boardrooms, schools, and homes alike, an everlasting proof that courage can outshine wealth, and integrity can echo louder than applause.